Fresco, and he will be speaking about miscomputation as malfunction in the computational sciences of mind and brain. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks, Elliot, and thanks all the organizers. It's a wonderful workshop, I should say, and a very impressive turnout. So thanks everyone for coming. Right, so maybe I should start by saying that anyone who strongly endorses Seth's view, please stand up and walk out. No, just joking. Maybe delete it from the recording. No, but more seriously, it's good that there's some disagreement here, room for progress, rooms for some interesting stuff. So another disclaimer, Ron and Marc are part of this project, okay? So they're responsible for everything that's right. I'm responsible for everything that might be wrong, okay? With that in mind, let's get started. Mouse. So what am I going to talk about today? Computation, but more specifically miscomputation, okay? And I'm going to start by talking about how miscomputation is actually used in computational sciences of mind and brain. I'm going to talk briefly about how computation is actually defined in philosophy of computation, okay? And as a result of that, we'll see what the implications are for explaining miscomputation if we endorse those views. I'm going to present a dilemma for normative accounts of computation. Maybe I should say that I'm going to focus mostly on mechanistic accounts of computation, but the general moral would also apply for the other main contender, which is the semantic view of computation. I'm going to suggest some ways out of the dilemma. Specifically, I'm going to suggest three. I'll suggest that, or I'll argue that two of them don't actually work. And the third one that I recently developed with Marc, we think it's a promising start. We don't know if it's quite just there yet, but as we said before, work in progress. And hopefully there'll still be coffee afterwards. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know. Is that a good time to say that there was no water here today? I'm dehydrated. My bottle knows that. Okay, good. So let's see how miscomputation is used in sciences of mind and brain. I'll just read this quote out loud. I think the first guy quoted here is actually based here in London. So the basic premise of computational psychiatry is that alterations in the computations that the brain performs can lead to its malfunction or mental illness. This view suggests that computational errors can lead to illness in the absence of any other neural problems, okay? So miscomputation is used in order to characterize at least some mental phenomena. So we heard a lot about delusion today, so fortunately I don't need to say anything about it, but other phenomena like illusion, hallucination have been recently explained by scientists as sort of miscomputations, okay? So some of them belong to the predictive processing view. I mean, if anyone wants to know more about it, I can talk about it in the Q&A, but basically predictive processing framework in which the abnormalities like illusion, hallucination, delusion, etc., are described as something going wrong in the process of integrating priors and sensory inputs from the environment. Again, a complex story. We can go into it in the Q&A. And again, I need to feel with the mouse. Oh, sorry. That's all right. Okay, so leaving aside delusions, illusions, etc. So the visual systems computation of depth from binocular disparity cues, okay, that partly explains the good behavior, okay? So while healthy individuals are able to reach or grasp objects successfully, and miscomputations are obviously the reason that those with neuronal deficits are having trouble in grasping behavior, reaching behavior, etc. However, we need to move on again to some other phenomena like dyslexia. Okay, so in this case, we have scientists that hypothesize that perceptual deficiencies that are associated with dyslexia in this case can be understood as, again, computational deficits in the integration of prior information and noisy observations from the environment. Okay, the details matter less. You might recognize that name here. So some have claimed that any mental disorder is necessarily a brain disorder. Okay, so something that's pitched at the hardware level. Okay, because all mental functions are selected effects of the brain. We can talk about it more in the Q&A, but I'll actually take it even to a more extreme, or another option basically to treat computation and miscomputation in the brain. So Matteo Colombo recently argued that when scientists actually appeal to the notion of miscomputation to explain sort of, I don't know, psychiatric phenomena, the use or the appeal to miscomputation is merely instrumental. Okay, so it's like a scientist fiction. So it helps us explain things, but they don't need to commit metaphysically to the idea that brains compute or miscompute by implication. Great. Okay, now let's see how that works in philosophy of computation. But before we talk about miscomputation, let's talk about the good case. So as I said, I'm going to focus just on two of the main views, the mechanistic and the semantic. So the mechanistic view has many proponents. Okay, some of them are listed here: Marcin Milkowski, Gualtiero Piccinini, Dimitri Coelho-Molo. So according to this view, I'm trying to generalize as much as I can. Physical computation occurs in mechanisms of a specific type. Okay, those are systems of spatially, temporally organized, causally related components, which functions to perform. Okay, one of the functions is to compute, but I'll talk about it in a few minutes. The semantic view, on the other hand, basically argues that physical computation presupposes representational content, okay, as part of its individuation. So in other words, representation is a necessary criterion for a physical process to count as computational, okay? So some of the proponents of the semantic view accept certain assumptions of the mechanistic view when it comes to implementation, okay? But when it comes to computation, representation needs to be appealed to. Moving on. Okay, so let's assume that these are the two main options for explaining physical computation. We obviously care about illusions, hallucinations. And so if the brain computes normally when the behavior is successful, good, or whatever it is, adaptive, okay, can any of these accounts, okay, explain the existence of miscomputation? So our claim is that insofar as those normative accounts actually embed the norm of computation in the very definition of computation. Okay, so the very definition of computation requires, okay, an appeal to some form of norm. And here the mechanistic and the semantic views diverge. Okay, but anyway, if that's the case, they face a dilemma, and at the very least, they require a revision in order to be able to explain miscomputation. So focusing on mechanistic accounts of computation, there are different reasons for appealing to teleological functions in an account of computation, and I'm just going to mention two. One is the fact that computation is normative. Okay, so we heard a lot about selected effects theory, so we can say it's an effect of an effect an entity is supposed to have. Okay, the computation, and say. And here, let's focus first on an artificial computer or artificial adding machine. We can say it's supposed to add its inputs. Okay, so if you give it a 3 and a 5, it's supposed to give you an 8, not a -2, not 15, not anything like that. Moving on to some more interesting examples, neurons. Okay, some of them are supposed to some their inputs, okay, coming from the dendrites, etc. But again, let's not dwell too much on that. Another reason is to avoid pan-computationalism. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this literature, but the idea of pan-computationalism is to say, following Putnam and Searle, Wall and Wordstar, etc., etc. Even this desk here actually computes, okay? And there are a variety of pan-computationalism. So some would say that this table computes every Turing computable function, okay? So any mathematical function that can be computed by an algorithm is computed by this desk. And some people might just say, you know, it computes some functions, maybe just one, maybe a few, but it computes nevertheless, okay? So the idea of the mechanistic approach is to say that only mechanisms with teleological functions can qualify as genuine computing systems, okay? So these are specific types of mechanism. Not every mechanism computes, but you need to be a mechanism if you want to be a computer or a computing system. Okay, now let's start talking about miscomputation a little bit. So unlike a malfunction, so people talked here about hearts. So I decided not to talk about hearts and not have pictures of hearts, but have hearts in mind, okay? So if a heart stops pumping, okay, we're saying that it's malfunctioning, okay? Have the picture in mind if you really need to, okay? The point of this claim is very simple, and I think it's a very nice observation that Tucker makes in a relatively recent paper. Okay, he says, miscomputation is a kind of computation. How does that? So miscomputation does not occur when no computation occurs. Let's take an example. If your iPhone was dropped in a pond, okay, and it now stops giving any outputs whatsoever, it doesn't compute anymore. Okay, if it doesn't compute anymore, we cannot say that it miscomputes. Similarly, take a neuron, and let's assume for the time being, maybe you don't want to assume that, but let's assume that neurons actually compute. If the neuron, or if a particular neuron stops firing, okay, let's say that you know, molecules do penetrate the cell membrane, whatever, but it never fires an action potential. Okay, so it never produces any output. In this case, we cannot say it miscomputes. What we do want to say when the system miscomputes is that it simply computes a different mathematical function, G, okay? And G is the star of this talk. So G is the mathematical function that is being computed in the bad case, okay? And F is the mathematical function that's computed in the good case, okay? So think about F being addition and G being multiplication, okay? So when you have a system that's supposed to compute F or addition, okay, but it actually computes a different mathematical function like multiplication, we would say that the system computes and miscomputes at the same time, or in other words, it computes a different function than the one that was intended. Okay, so now let's try to summarize it. Relative to a physical computing system S, again, S will star in the next slides to try to remember it. So first, a normative claim. S is supposed to compute a mathematical function F. You're starting to see the divergence from set stock. This is where it starts. An actuality claim. So S actually computes the mathematical function G, where we say that G is different than F. Okay, these are two different mathematical functions. Let's keep it very simple. We can say that G differs from the mathematical function F, okay? If at the very least, for some inputs, it produces a different output from F, okay? So suppose that we have two functions and only for two inputs, out of all possible inputs, it produces a different output than what F gives us in response to those inputs. Am I going too fast? No, okay. They're different, end of story. Moving on. So failure to compute is basically the statement that when S computes G, okay, it fails to compute F. Okay, this is when miscomputation occurs. Great. Actually going good in time, so I can even drink. Next, dilemma. So I'm told that the dilemma has two horns, so let's talk about the horns. One of them, if satisfying the norm F is necessary for the system S being regarded as computing, Piccinini enters the picture. Then S performing G cannot qualify as computation at all. Okay, for those of you that are not familiar with the mechanistic account of computation, I'll give you a very quick summary. Gualtiero, if you're listening, you're probably not going to like it. So he says something like that. To compute, and it's compute star, that's basically a placeholder for saying something like a mechanism that transforms medium independent vehicles according to a rule F that is sensitive only to the degrees of freedom of the medium independent vehicles. End of story. That's basically computation, okay? This is the important part. You don't need to remember the definition. If we say that S, okay, for it to qualify as computing, it needs to compute F, okay? That's the norm, that's the function it needs to compute. And then when it computes G, G is different than F, right? We just said that G is different than F. So basically follows, then in that case, there is no miscomputation. Why is there no miscomputation? Simply because there's no computation. I'll say it again. If we say that computation is the computation of the rule F, and rule F corresponds with a mathematical function F, say addition again, and then the very same system, nothing has changed supposedly. Now it computes G, okay? We give it the same inputs, all of a sudden, I don't know, for 3 and 5, it does 15, okay? So that's not addition. In this case, it's not computation, it's not miscomputation, we have a problem. Another question that arises with respect to this issue with miscomputation, it's not very clear which theory of function can actually attribute the function of computing G to a system that actually computes G. Why? Remember that when we talk about G as a miscomputation, that can be something detrimental, right? That can be something that's harmful to the, I don't know, organism or component or whatever it is. And if that's the case, I mean, if that's something that's not contributing to fitness or propensity for fitness, et cetera, and we heard about it before. So if G is an effect that never benefited the organism or, you know, some subsystem in any way in the past, it actually fails to have a teleological function, or so it seems to us. So consider even a very liberal view like Cummings, right? Cummings functions. Cummings basically says that if we want to know what the function of a component is, we need to see how it contributes to the bigger system, right? But if G is actually something that does not contribute to fitness or whatever of that system, okay, the performance of that system, then it's not clear that we can call it function. Anyway, second one, and here I'm drawing on Dimitri's characterization of computation. So Dimitri is saying something like this. If satisfying some norm to compute is necessary for S being regarded as computing, then S performing G cannot qualify as miscomputation. He says this part, everything up to that comma, we say everything that follows. Okay, again, slowly. When we just looked at the first one, we said that Gualtiero basically says that computation is the computation of F, okay, a specific function. So there's a particular function, and once we know that it computes, that system computes, we also know what the mathematical function being computed is, okay? That's what you get. You have an individuation of computation. Dimitri, on the other hand, is more liberal. Okay, I think he might have seen this thing coming, and so rather than insisting that the norm that the system needs to satisfy is a specific norm, okay, computing F or processing medium independent vehicles, according to F, rule F, okay. So he says no, some general rule. I mean, it can be F, it can be G, it can be H. Pick your letter. Fine, that's good, that's progress. But then the point is that if we say that to compute is to compute any rule, okay, nothing specific, not F, not G, not H, not X, not whatever, okay, then when we see the system now moving away from performing F to performing G, the definition of the computation says, according to a rule, is G a rule? Yes. It satisfies the requirement. If it satisfies the requirement, it computes. Excellent. It computes, but then there's no miscomputation. So far, so good. Excellent. I thought this would take more time. It took less. Hold on. Possible ways out of the dilemma. Again. Maybe I should include some extra slides. Okay, possible ways out of the dilemma. Spoiler alert, I think the first two don't work. Okay, one way to go about it is to adopt a view like Tucker that I mentioned before and Joe Dewhurst as well. They basically say something very simple. Well, not simple, but simple to explain. So they're also mechanists about computation, and they also think that we need to consider the structure and the organization of the components, as part of a mechanism that computes. But what they say, the norm is actually external to the definition of computation. Remember what I said before, a normative account is such that the norm of the computation is part of the definition, okay? So it's rule F, rule G, rule whatever, okay? Here, there's no such thing, okay? In that case, computation is individuated without any appeal to Taylor functions. Let's maybe try to look at it more briefly, but without pictures and without tables. Like I usually like to show truth tables. I resisted the temptation. So suppose that we have S computing whatever it performs in a medium independent manner. Okay, all mechanists accept that characterization. And now let's suppose that you have a simple system. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be an AND gate, it can be an adder, it can be whatever, a CPU. So for these guys, the way to individuate what the computation performed by the system is to look at the mechanistic properties or the physical properties. So to make it very simple, think about a system that accepts inputs of various voltage ranges, okay? And then spits out an output voltage, okay, according to some specification. This is where a table would have helped. Imagine a truth table and just imagine before you go into the zeros and ones, just having 0 to 5 volts and 0 to 5 volts gives you an output of 0 to 5 volts. Okay, and when it's like 0 to 5 volts and say, I don't know, 5 to 10, okay, so the two inputs are different, then maybe the output is different as well. So let's suppose that in this case, the output is also 5 to 10, okay? For them, this is all that computation is, transforming inputs of one kind to outputs of either the same kind or another. So on their view, miscomputation is pragmatically determined. What does that mean? The system S might be said to compute G when deviating from some externally imposed norm F. Okay, so the system does whatever it does. The external norm is, I don't know, if I'm the programmer or I'm the designer or the architect of the system or whatever, I say this system should perform blah, whatever, okay? So if whatever the system does at a particular time then deviates from that external norm, I can say that it miscomputes. Remind me your name, please. Sander. So if Sander said that the norm is G and Justin says that the norm is F, okay, they can disagree about the very same system doing exactly the same thing. You can say that it miscomputes. You can say that it computes hunky-dory, okay? Same system, miscomputing, not miscomputing, depending on the perspective. I guess you can already understand what prices, thank you for that, what prices they have to pay. So first of all, there are some forms of pan-computationalism. Again, so I didn't elaborate much on the different versions of pan-computationalism. The more dangerous one is unlimited pan-computationalism. So this desk actually performing every Turing computable function there is. So Tucker actually suggests a very complicated way of avoiding at least some forms of pan-computationalism. You need to accept some other principle. We won't get into it. Still, even in that case, as far as I understand, some pan-computationalism still remains, okay? That's one thing. And another thing, other than perspectives, etc., there are issues of computational indeterminacy, okay? So again, this is where I resisted my temptation to show logic truth tables. Everyone here knows what an AND gate is and an OR gate is? Say yes, even if you don't. Otherwise, I'll have to explain it. An AND gate and an OR gate in Boolean logic are dual functions, okay? If you swap all the zeros for ones and all the ones for zeros, say in the AND gate, you get the exact mirror image, which is the OR gate, okay? And obviously vice versa. The issue is that the very same system can compute physically the very same thing. And if now let's go with Justin and Elsa, okay? Justin might say that this function is OR, and you might say that it computes AND, okay? There's no way to arbitrate between the two of you. Why is that? Because it's the very same system, the very same physical process going on, okay? But you're interpreting the voltages in one way, you're interpreting the voltages another way. No way to arbitrate, indeterminacy. Okay, lovely. Another suggestion made by Oron, I don't think he endorses that option at all, specifically because he doesn't like the idea of teleological functions, but let's play along. So he says that the norm of computation and its teleological function may diverge, okay? How does that work? We might say that the teleological function of S is to compute F, addition, but the norm of the computation is different and is external to S, okay? Similar to what I said before about Dewhurst and Tucker, only that in this case, teleological functions do play a role in specifying what computation is, but then we're saying there's also an external norm that dictates when the system is miscomputing. So the function that is actually being computed is right or wrong, okay? That's part of an external perspective. And so the computation is determined by the teleological function, and whether it computes or miscomputes, that's a matter of external perspective. Moving on. Excellent benefits for computer scientists, okay? Why is that? Because if you think about a computer running a program, there are different many ways that the computer might have bugs or miscompute or whatever, okay? I don't want to get into it too much. You might say that the computer doesn't satisfy the requirements of the designer, or say that the computer does satisfy the requirements of the designer, but the programmer made an error, or the programmer coded something he didn't intend to code, okay? So the system doesn't do what the programmer wanted, or even if in the case of everything is hunky-dory according to architect and designer and programmer spec, and the manufacturer delivered a great computer with, I don't know, whatever Microsoft Windows is running right now. You guys should move to Mac. I mean, that's the cue. Still, the users might choose to use that system differently, okay? Why? Because their external perspective, their norm is different, okay? So I can use, it's not a very good example, I can use the computer now to block the door. Maybe that's the purpose of the computer. Never mind, let's move on. Prices to be paid, external perspectives. I think I said enough about it. That's an issue. So we might disagree about whether the system computes or miscomputes at the same time. Secondly, in performing the function G, S does not comply with the teleo function F, right? We said that the two things diverge. So in that case, if it doesn't comply with that function F, then again, it doesn't compute, okay? So that seems like the strategy needs some revising before it can even work. And there can even be a case where S may miscompute, I don't know, for whatever reason, but there's no external perspective to be offered, right? So that system is just out there doing its thing. Let's think about a biological function. There's no external perspective. No one is looking at it. What's going on with the computation / miscomputation? Don't know. Last one, I'm in the 5-minute mark, I think now, right?
Give about 1 more minute before you.
So I'm doing well. Perfect. So very broadly speaking, the strategy that we're offering, and again, this is very tentative, is to basically treat the computational system as a computational system first. What does that mean? We first of all look at the system, the physical system, and determine when it's computational, okay? Once we know that the system is computational, then we ask a further question about every physical process that the system runs, whether it's computational or not. So now we draw again on the way that Dimitri describes computational system as such. So we say S is a computational system only if there's a rule F. So now we're actually requiring a specific function that's unlike what Dimitri says, such that the teleological function of S is to manipulate medium-independent vehicles according to the rule F in a way that's only sensitive to the degrees of freedom properties of those vehicles. Okay, same as before, only now we require F. This only gives us the system being a computational system. Next, now we're actually defining the computational process as a computational process relative to that system being computational, okay? So first of all, we need to know that the system is computational, and then we ask whether a particular process is a computation or not, and perhaps a miscomputation. Lovely. Principle P, preliminary suggestion, spoiler alert, is going to be revised, I think, in the next slide, but just slightly. A computational process, we say, is any process of manipulating medium-independent vehicles in the system S that's similar enough to the one in accordance with F. You think that this is very vague? You're right. We leave it vague on purpose, okay? We leave it vague in order to give us some room in order to explain certain situations. That's probably something that needs to require some more love and tender from us, but we'll do it after the conference. If we have a situation where some physical process in S fails to be causally sensitive to the input, so imagine now a scenario where you have a specific system that no matter which inputs it gets, it always produces the same output O, whatever that is, particular neurotransmitter being released, or I don't know, light or voltages or whatever the case may be. In this case, the system is not sensitive, or the process is not sensitive to the inputs it gets. It spits out the output, but it doesn't care about the inputs, okay? They matter not. In this case, it's actually so different from the good case that we said before that it shouldn't even count as a computation, right? So it's not a computational process. We want to exclude it. Lovely. So P basically specifies when a process counts as being computational, but that's not enough. We also want to know which function or which mathematical function is being executed by the system. That's another can of worms. That's the whole issue of implementation. But there are some suggestions in the literature, and we'll probably have to go with one that is compatible with our account. So we still need to specify, as I said, when a process counts as computing a specific function, G, F, H, whatever, doesn't matter. Okay. So here I think we can be fairly liberally, at least for now, for February 2024. We can state that whichever mathematical function S computes is the mathematical function that S actually follows. So now we look at what happens right now in that system given specific inputs. Wow, 1 minute. Now I'm running. So this is the new principle. Please start. Everything up to the point, same thing as before. I promised I didn't touch it. The only thing that was added, the process counts as G computation, if and only if the mapping between the physical inputs and outputs of the process corresponds to the mathematical function G. As you know, mathematical functions can be simply defined as sets of inputs to outputs, okay? The mapping gives us the mathematical function. We do that with the physical process. So if an adding system, let's assume that this is a biological system, malfunctions, and then rather than adding, it actually multiplies, then we say that it computes multiplication in virtue of being a computational system with a specific function F, and it actually performs a causal process that's similar enough to the good case, okay? Because It's sensitive to the degrees of freedom, it manipulates digits, being causally sensitive to them, blah, blah, blah. Lovely. Okay, and then the other thing is that the process input-output mapping corresponds to the multiplication function. I'll do this very quickly. You might be familiar with Garson's book. The function of adding is due to history. As I said, it's a biological function, but then the inability to perform addition right now is used to classify the current performance of multiplication as a miscomputation relative to S. Okay. You can read it in the book, page 125. Trust me, I didn't change much apart from what's in the reference. I don't remember you talking about addition and multiplication. Moving on, conclusions. Most normative accounts actually struggle to explain miscomputation as a straightforward implication of what computation is. We think that assumption is false. The same story applies to the semantic accounts. Those actually have to do with veridicality conditions, so that might relate back to the formal functions, but same story. If we want theories of computation, and I think Seth, please excuse me, I do want theories of computation to explain abnormal behavior as well and what the brain does, then they need revision. We offered several strategies. Several of them don't work. There are many others. We think that what we suggest at least doesn't suffer the same consequences. And I finish here. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. We have about 15 minutes. I was not going to ask a question, but since you invoked me at the very end, I will ask a very brief question. And I don't follow this literature much, but it wasn't obvious to me that miscomputation is a kind of computation. I'm not sure that that's true for the following reason. Suppose I have a pocket adder. I have a device. Its only job is to add two numbers together. And so I put in, but suppose there's something funny about it where every time I put in the number 3 and the number 4, it short circuits and it prints the number 9. I would be comfortable saying it's not really computing. I understand somebody saying, no, Justin, it's actually computing some other function, but I would be comfortable there saying, no, there's a difference between the thing computing and the thing short-circuiting and printing numbers. Is that crazy or is that okay with you?
Well, I didn't think about this observation that Tucker made until fairly recently,
okay.
So I can understand your intuition. But if we say that the system previously was doing, addition. So you said 3 and 4.
That's
so
its job.
7, right?
Uh-huh.
If now, for some reason, there's been a short circuit, then that's, systematic, right? So every time you give the 3 and the 4, it gives you, I don't know, whatever you said, 9. Then it is sensitive to the inputs. There is a different mathematical function. We don't have a name for this. It's like right? The whole thing about the cruise function, etc. So everything other than 3 and 4 works hunky-dory. 3 and 4 gives you a 9 for whatever reason. That's a different mathematical function. If it's a different mathematical function, it's miscomputing. I think that when you will bring this system back to the programmer that actually designed it, and you tell him, look, every time I give it all the other inputs, it gives me the right outputs. But when I give it a 3 and a 4, it gives me a 9. He would probably tell you, look, there's a bug in the system. I need to check whether it's the program. I need to check whether it's the hardware. Given your setup, it's going to be a problem in the hardware, and then they'll have to fix it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. Questions. Couple questions.
Seth,
Now this, yeah, I know. Seth gets the right to ask a question here.
Thank you. Great talk.
Yours too.
Thank you.
Let me speak.
I guess I have two questions. One is sort of for you and Justin, and the other is just for you. So the first one is, I think it depends on whether each time you enter the 3 and the 4, it short circuits, or if there was a prior short circuit, which then later results in every time you enter 3 and 4, you get 9 instead of 7. Because I would think if it's the first case where it's a short circuit every time, then in fact it's not causally sensitive to the medium independent vehicles. Whereas if it's a prior short circuit that leads to a permanent change where you have this result and not for any other numbers, then there is causal sensitivity to the medium independent vehicles. Do you think that's right? Oh, okay. Is that right?
That's the way I interpret it.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant, that it short circuits every time and it just spews out a 9 because, but and so in a way that it's not sensitive to the numbers. So perhaps that would not count as a computation. But I
Right.
don't, that's
Okay.
what I was thinking.
So that's what I was thinking you were thinking.
Okay. thank
Right,
you.
and you were
Thank
thinking-
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You're clarifying.
Clarifying the, yeah, yeah. The second, no worries. The second question was, I wonder if you couldn't, if your view couldn't be understood as involving like a derived proper function.
About it. Originally, I thought maybe that would be a good way to go about it, but I think that might be problematic because if you look at the right functions as I think they're classically defined, you might think of this derived function being pretty much new in every single context when the very same operation is performed. The example I think of about the chameleon, right, that changes the color of its skin depending on the environment. So every single time it changes its color, it might be a different color altogether, and suppose it never even repeats the same color again. Not very likely, logically possible, right? So I don't want to say that it says if we think about a neuron or the amygdala or hippocampus or whatever the case may be, as performing certain computations, we want to be able to say, look, this thing computes this or that or whatever. And then in the cases that it does not compute that function, that may result in a bad behavior. Okay, and this is typically how I interpret some computational neuroscientists as referring to those phenomena. I don't want to deny that option altogether. I actually think it has some virtues, but I'm not sure I can adopt it without inheriting the consequences as well. But thanks very much. I hope Mark will listen to what you just said.
Oh, no. All right, more questions? So, Fabian, did you have something too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Something.
Okay, well, Nick will go next and then perhaps if it comes back.
So I wonder whether, so you say these cases where you get some inputs and no outputs at all can't be miscomputations. So
No,
you get some inputs, no outputs at all. That's like putting your iPhone in
yes.
the pond.
Yeah.
So miscomputation has to involve some transition. You say the transition might be to, the transition from 3 and 5 might be to 15. And you seem to move from that to that's the computation of another function. I wonder if that's a premise, because I don't, and once you're there, then you get your dilemma. But I wonder if you need that.
The last part because I was paying attention to Harriet.
So
Sorry,
you say there, you say to be in the,
not moving.
in the category of computation, sorry, I've gone hoarse. To be in the category of computation, you say there have to be inputs and outputs.
Correct.
And you move from that to say, well, that's a function. Therefore, there is some other
Mathematical
function. There is some other function that it's computing.
Mhm.
But I wonder, and that seems to be a premise that creates the dilemma. Like you might think there's a transition that it needs to make to count as miscomputation. You might use a function to characterize the transition, but there's no need to count that function that it's instantiating as a computation. So why isn't that a very simple way of getting out of the dilemma?
So I must not be getting you because the way I want to respond is very trivial, and that's probably not what you meant. So the idea is that if the system, as it's supposed to function, performs function F, okay, and function F is simply, these inputs, lead you to those outputs, whatever the algorithm or whatever the transition rules are, that's fine. So it's computing a particular function, okay? What we're saying is that if you have a case where rather than computing or rather than producing outputs in response to these inputs that are characterized by that function, and then there's a case in which the system, at least for one of these possible inputs, generates a different output from the specified set, then it's a miscomputation. it simply diverges from the mathematical function it should have computed. End of story. That's my trivial answer, but that just means that I probably misunderstood your question.
But then you have a puzzle because
That's the function. How are we going to count that different function? Right.
and then
Or
and then you get the dilemma.
It's a miscomputation.
quite. So you might say it's a miscomputation. We don't have to characterize it as a computation at all. And then you don't get your dilemma.
Perhaps thinking about it. Sorry. And I was just thinking, I don't know why, I can call it a miscomputation. And say it's not a computation at the same time.
Justin, come stand here, please, next to the microphone.
No, sorry, I mean to, okay, just to jump in here. I mean, maybe Nick and I are saying the same thing. I was thinking that the machine could be miscomputing. And you could characterize that in terms of a certain kind of an alternate mathematical function. If you want to describe it that way, you're welcome to describe it that way. But it's, I don't know why you would have to describe it as engaging in computation at all.
So you're basically saying go along with something like Piccinini's account.
I like Gualtiero. Oh, I'm Gualtiero.
Sorry. No, it's all right. I mean, so you said that if it computes a different function, so you're saying not. I don't want to call it miscomputation yet. You said if the output is different for at least one input, I characterized it as a different mathematical function. Therefore, I want to call it a miscomputation, right?
Yes.
And you're saying as soon as there's a divergent output, even one, then you're saying don't call it a computation at all.
Yes. I'm okay calling it a miscomputation because it's not doing what it's supposed to do, but whether you also want to count that as a computation, I'm not sure that I would do that.
I'm going to say something that I'm probably going to regret.
Oh.
When you talk about misrepresentation, isn't that a case of representation, just doing it?
I'm not
wrong?
sure, I'm not
Okay.
sure about it.
Okay, if you're not sure about that, then we need to have a separate discussion,
Yes,
but I think
so.
the intuition is very similar.
Oh,
In
in
the
that
same way
respect.
that I don't think the whole malfunction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, your discussion went so long that you just took my point. Great. So yeah, basically my idea was teleosemantics has exactly the same problem insofar as you want to say, yeah, if there is there can be some representation with the wrong input, and that would be a kind of malfunction of the producer of the representation. So why not just say it's a miscomputation because it's an outcome that would be appropriate given other inputs, but these are not the right inputs.
But then how do you determine what's right and what's wrong? I mean, what determines the norm of the computation and when it's correct and when it's incorrect? It needs to be determined by the theory of computation, right? Otherwise, you can't say when one is a computation versus a miscomputation.
Oh, okay. Selected response functions. I don't know. So I
Fine, but
Yeah.
that's the whole point. I mean, that's the point that I don't know about response functions necessarily, but I think
Yeah.
Gualtiero and Dimitri basically subscribe to a notion of function that perhaps appeals to history. I mean, Gualtiero not so much. He likes the dispositionalist account, but then when he talks about certain cases, it does appeal to recent history. So I don't know. I don't want to get into that debate, but the idea is, yes, you do want to talk about evolution or, recent selection history or whatever, or differential maintenance or whatever the case may be for current, ontogeny, right, in organisms. But then you need to be able to say when a miscomputation occurs, okay, and you need to do it in a consistent manner. At least those two accounts that I know of, Dimitri's and Gualtiero's, they're fine. They make perfect sense when it comes to computation with some disclaimers. But the point is that the definition of miscomputation is not a straightforward implication of their account, even though Gualtiero in the 2015 book says, yeah, absolutely. And his account of miscomputation is very similar. It's a case where you have certain inputs that should have produced a specific output and they don't, and that's a miscomputation. That's fine. But that really doesn't follow from your characterization. That was what we were trying to say. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, pleasure.
We may have time for one quick one. Harriet did temporarily suspend my chair privileges, but I think she's given them back to me. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Here we go. Yeah, we'll go to Zoom. I apologize.
So it's working fine from my perspective.
Yes.
I'm curious to see who that person is.
Okay, as in the green GRU versus group case, what you see as a miscomputation is somebody else's computation. So you'd be wrong to say it's no computation because your miscomputation could be my computation. I might have bought a machine, oops, to add except 3 + 4 when I want to have 9. So it's, oh, if it adds 3 + 4 when I want to have 9, it's working fine from my perspective. It is a computation. It's relative to language. In our case, computational theory. History is indeed relevant.
Awesome, only that the case is again that the norm, if I understand it correctly, is external. If the norm is external, then
Yes.
we're back to the prices that need to be paid, or you have to bite some bullets, like pan-computationalism, as I mentioned before, and also computational indeterminacy. So this is an interesting case, and going for such an example might solve maybe Justin's worry, but then there's a price to be paid for many other computations where your potato is his potato, and we cannot agree.
All right, well, let's thank you so much, Nir.
That was